Welcome to another episode of Sustainable Living at Home with Janine Liza. In this episode, I will be sharing one of my favourite recipes for making garlic herb bread and my trick for making the bread lighter and softer. This morning I'm going to make some bread using the bread machine cookbook, but without the bread machine. For the longest time I've been trying to figure out how to make my homemade breads lighter and fluffier. And I think I finally figured it out, so I thought I would share it on my YouTube channel. So garlic basil bread, but I make a few changes. So I'm using a variety of herbs instead of the basil. It's almost going to smell like a roast dinner because it's going to have those kinds of herbs in it from say a turkey roast. So let's go ahead and do that. Perfect temperature. I also like to keep a little extra water for later, for when the dough is mixing, in case it's a little bit. So this is half a teaspoon. Where's 1? 2. I don't have my quarter measure, but I always like to put a little bit extra anyways, and we're good. So just under half a teaspoon. So there we go. You can put 2 1/4 teaspoons of yeast if you want, that's fine. I just did a tiny bit more. So now I have that, I'm going to get a whisk and I'm going to mix that into the water. All blended up evenly. 2 tablespoons of sugar. One and a half teaspoons of salt. I always spill the salt when I'm pouring it out. 1 and a half, and again a little bit extra, a little bit less, that's not too bad. There we go. We got half and we got lots on the table. There we go. Give that a stir. And now it's saying 2 tablespoons of milk powder. So powdered milk. So now we're going to go to the dried basil leaves, 1 1/2 teaspoons. Now instead of that, I'm just going to sprinkle the herbs that I like in there. So I'm going to put some rosemary in there, all the other herbs. A little bit of oregano. There we go. And of course some sage. I love sage. Since it's powder, it's going to mix evenly through. And then I'll just add a little bit of parsley. Just to have those little specks of green leaves in there. And a little bit of taste. Offset the garlic too. There we go. So it says 2 cloves of finely chopped garlic. Now I buy diced garlic in a jar. And 2 cloves to me is about a tablespoon of diced garlic. We have the diced garlic here. So sort of equal to 2 cloves of garlic. There we go. So 1 tablespoon. I'm just going to separate into little pieces as I put it in here. Try to drop it in like that. Just so it spreads out a little bit because it's not really softened. It tends to work its way in. Little pieces. There we go. I mean, you could put it in the microwave for 10 seconds, but you don't want it going in there too hot. So, there we go. Well, that's looking pretty mucky. Okay, let's double check the list again. So here's the recipe again, and again it's from the Betty Crocker Best Bread Machine Cookbook. In this video I am adapting this recipe and I'm working from the 1 1/2 pound recipe. The last ingredients are 3 cups of bread flour and the 2 ingredients that I add to make the bread lighter and softer. 1 2 and 3. There we go. Just sprinkle that on. A little bit of baking powder. And just before this goes in the stand mixer to mix, I'm going to add 1 large heaping spoonful of sour cream. This is another ingredient that I find helps the bread to become softer, while the baking powder helps it to rise more. Okay, I've got my jug of water handy here in order to add more if it's too dry. Let me bring this over and show you. So I sprinkled some flour over the top to make it easier to lift it out of the bowl, turned it over into the flour, and you can see it's made a beautiful soft dough. I mean, it is so soft. I just curl it into itself like that, get a bit more flour onto it. I'll pop it back into this bowl, cover it with some plastic wrap, then I place a towel on top of it and set it somewhere warm to rise. Usually on top of the fridge because the heat rises in the kitchen, and I can leave it there for an hour or so, maybe 2 hours, and let it rise. So I have a tray with some parchment paper, just put a bit of flour on there so it doesn't stick. Let's have a look and see how well it's risen. Wow, look at that. Beautiful. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tip this over, drop it out like that, and some of it will go back down. That's in the flour, which is helpful so it's not sticking. And now I'm just going to stretch this out a bit. Whoop. Let me get a bit more dough, flour on my hands. Got enough dough on my hands. Get a little bit more flour, just so it isn't too sticky. Get that to move around a little bit. There we go. And now I'm just stretching it out like this. Make a bit of a loaf shape. I'll cover that again with the plastic wrap. Just like that. Cover it with the towel, and I'm going to lift the tray and I'm going to put this up in the same spot it was in before. And just give it some time to rise. It might be another hour. Okay, so I didn't wait too long, but you can see that this has risen a little. And now I'm just going to pop this in the oven. I'm not going to put a glaze on it because I notice sometimes when I put a glaze on it, it sort of restricts it from expanding a little bit. I'm popping that in a 350-degree oven for about 25 to 30 minutes. And there's the loaf, fresh out the oven. Nice and soft, beautiful and light, very airy. You could slice this up, sprinkle some cheese on top, bake it again, and it would be delicious with a pasta dish. Thank you once again to my subscribers. If you're a visitor to this channel and you'd like to help support it, please feel free to go to Art with Janine Liza on YouTube and click subscribe.